This is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners in cooperation with Prophecy DeFi. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Today we have a very special guest, the CEO and founder of Decentral and Jaxx, and of course co-founder of Ethereum, Anthony Di Iorio. Anthony, welcome to the show. You were there at the very beginning with Ethereum. You've got some great stories about how it all got started. Here we are half a decade later. The network's worth almost $200 billion, supports thousands of applications. It's used by millions of people, and it just underwent the biggest upgrade, maybe in the history of blockchains, probably the history of blockchains, and perhaps in the history of open source, the merge, which we talked about in the last episode. But love to get your expert and inside take on it. How do you feel?
Don't feel any different, really. Ethereum is a project, yes, I have a lot of roots in. To me, it's one of many that I support in the things that I do. I'm more of an ecosystem as a whole person, but over the last few years, I've been drawn back more into Ethereum in terms of the respect for the continued decentralization approach, I guess. And even though things might not be perfect still with the way things are, I've always felt Ethereum has really not done things to try to dismantle decentralization. And I know we'll get into that a little bit more in the future, but I've come around more over the last few years, actually back more to Ethereum than I had been over the prior years. So following it quite a bit more, I build and we run and maintain nodes for Ethereum. So we were intimately involved in making sure our nodes got updated, everything that was done properly for the merge, moving it over, and it's done. But as we were talking earlier, I don't feel any different really. I'm glad that it went off the way it did so far. There's still, let's see what comes out in the next few weeks and months and even years based on this whole new difference that's happened, the move to proof of stake. But all in all, I was thinking that it was going to work out well. It seems to have done that. And now let's see if there's any other remnants, repercussions over the next while.
Well, what do you think does come next? I think we were a little bit surprised by how smooth it went, and also how little impact really it had on the broader market. Obviously price is only one of many different ways to measure success and to measure network health, but it was sort of a, sell the news event. And I'm wondering, putting that aside, what do you think are the next big milestones that are going to happen for the network as it embarks on really a new stage, a new chapter of its growth?
Yeah, this is one step towards, it's a further step of Ethereum being something that can be globally used and can radically change many different sectors. It's scalability still is the issue. There's making things cheaper. This was a necessary stage, and now over the next year, still there's going to be hopefully that move to continue turning it into something that's not just a toy, which is really what it's been over the last number of years now. Maybe we can say a little better than that. Not necessarily a toy, but something that just was not scalable enough to be able to make it something reasonable for someone to use, and that this move will be a step towards that. And a lot of people maybe think that this change didn't do what it in terms of scalability and things. It actually didn't, and that wasn't the focus. It was a focus of a moving from one model to another, from proof of work to proof of stake. Now in that, we're going to see what's going to happen in the coming years to make things more of a tool that can be used by more people, has faster throughput, has more scalability, and hopefully more and more of industries and sectors building on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that people put a lot of faith in the merge as some sort of like a thing that was going to fix all these problems. But the Ethereum Foundation and people who are in the know, have been quite clear that this is, as you say, a really important milestone in moving from proof of work to proof of stake. And in the long run, might change the supply and demand dynamics and the tokenomics. But really what it does is sort of clear the deck for the core developers and for the community as a whole to push the other upgrades that you're describing to make it more scalable and more useful as well. I like your description of it as a toy. I think a lot of people view that as, typically a criticism of something. But in fact, a lot of new technologies, when they first start out, really are dismissed as being a toy. And actually, there's a great book called The Innovator's Dilemma, where Clay Christensen describes how a lot of new technologies, when they emerge, are actually not particularly useful for the mass market, which is why companies generally don't try to embrace them initially, but that they're very useful for a small subset of the market. And obviously, there's a very small but passionate and growing subset of the market that of creators with NFTs or with people in DeFi with self custody and some of the other benefits of smart contracts and crypto assets. And as the underlying technology becomes more capable, those kinds of benefits begin to percolate into other aspects of the economy. And then all of a sudden, it's something where it is being used widely by lots of different kinds of people. I know I've got lots more questions. Andrew, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really notable about this whole shift is really just the core nexus of the Ethereum team, the core founders, I should say, were from Canada and Toronto in most cases, such as yourself, Vitalik, Joe Lubin, among many others. I'm just curious, how do you think about this in terms of its impact on the Canadian crypto scene and more just how reflective of it is it of kind of our Toronto and Canada as a core sort of crypto powerhouse?
Yeah, I think very early on back in 2012 is when the community started being built around Bitcoin. And it was, in 2 months, it'll be 10 years when the Bitcoin meetups were first started in Toronto. It was November 3rd, 2012, that those were set up. Vitalik, I met him at the very first meetup that I hosted. And it seemed to just be that community building side of things and continuously doing events and people coming together and then having physical spaces. It was really, I think, an early time for much of the world. And a lot of it was happening in Toronto. And there were a lot of great minds that were coming out of there. Peter Todd from Toronto, we had Dino Mark. There's just a number of people and a lot of enthusiasm that grew from 2012 right up until the end of 2013 when the first glimpses of Ethereum were had. So I think that building of the community, which was something that was my initial goal, I was very enthused about Bitcoin in the summer of 2012. I just was devouring everything I could on it, and then looking how can I share that with others, and it just didn't exist at the time. And I'd gone through that with the internet back in the 90s, and I wasn't quite equipped or at the right time to utilize and be able to do something worthwhile when I was back in the 90s, early 2000s. But this was like a perfect right time for me. I had a technology background since very young. I knew all about decentralized technologies. I'd been studying economics, and it was just a perfect storm to start building a community. And that's really, I think, that community that formed in Toronto and now is being carried on by groups like Bitcoin Bay. It just I think helped to expedite and grow the core here in Toronto, and not just Toronto, Canada. Vancouver was pretty big. Montreal had the Bitcoin embassy. So I just think Canada and different groups in the major cities really started bringing things forward, and I think that to me led to the growth of Ethereum. I think it led to Canada being a hub that has a lot of that recognition for doing what it did. But then unfortunately as well, there are decisions that had to be made by a lot of entities, organizations, including what we did with Ethereum, to move somewhere else because of just lack of clarity of could we safely do this where we wanted to do it. And unfortunately, the decision was made that we had to move elsewhere to get things set up. And we kind of were a catalyst for what happened in Switzerland and Zug to get things established there, even though we took a model from the open transaction guys. It wasn't us that first actually started that. We followed a model of another organization, and that's where we set up. But then from what we did there, that really grew out Zug in Switzerland and where they're known for the growth of blockchain on that side. But started out a lot of it in Canada. Vitalik and I got to know each other very well, 2012, 2013. I was building wallets already. He was helping me to work on that. And then when he showed me the white paper, I showed it to Charles Hoskinson, who I'd been doing some work with. Joe Lubin joined the team, coming to one of my meetups, January 1st, 2014, when I opened Decentral, the physical space. And then Vitalik brought in a few of his guys he'd been working on some projects on. And then we brought in Gavin Wood, who had connected with Vitalik. So that's how the team kind of formed, and the most of them were from, or at least there were more from Canada than there were from other places. So has its roots here, very strong, still going right now, I think, Canadian stuff, but unfortunately a lot of projects had to move offshore.
So yeah, that's I guess a great lead into my follow-up question, which is, I mean, we're all Toronto based, or at least Toronto natives. How do we make Toronto a hub for crypto? I know there's a lot of stuff you've been doing as well on the advocacy side to sort of help establish Toronto and make it a better place for developers such as myself. I'm just curious, what do you think of, or what are your sort of suggestions, or if you had the power, what would you do to make Toronto a better place for crypto developers?
So one of the things that I've, over the last few years, have focused a lot on, aside from the crypto space, is for creating a framework for how to solve problems, and things that I've used over the years to solve problems. Like, I've been building blockchain infrastructure and tools and things for 10 years now. And there was a realization back in 2012 that these technologies could empower people to be in control of their digital lives. Basically, what Web3 is promising, and what there's a lot of attention on Web3 right now, is a user-controlled internet. And that's something that I saw 10 years ago, and been building the pieces towards that to get there. And then I've kind of formalized it into a framework of how I solve problems and do things. So I think what it is the over the last couple of years, I've done a lot of case studies, a lot of different sectors outside of crypto, stuff in crypto, of identifying and understanding where the deficiencies are in various sectors. And I'm talking about in the art world. I'm talking about I did some stuff, but just some deep dives with like Sick Kids Hospital and all these different sectors. I've been doing these case studies, hundreds of them, of talks, and the commonality that I realized through them all, and the missing piece is problem solving and leadership. So you have this list of stakeholders. Each stakeholder is good at something. Okay, each stakeholder is not good at something, and everybody's got a problem. And if you go down the list of what is missing and what the problem is that there's a lack of people that can think beyond the way that systems currently work, into where, if you do it better and if you align more stakeholders together, you're going to get better solutions and be able to step out of the box of this is the way that's always worked. So from sector to sector, there's a lack of deep problem solving that can connect all the pieces together to create the change that is needed in every sector. So there's commonalities throughout. So getting back to the question in terms of putting it all together, my goal and a passion of mine is, how do we create the next generation of leaders and problem solvers? And Canada is going to be my testing ground for what I'm going to be doing with this. And I've announced a foundation recently whose sole goal is to build the next generation of leaders and problem solvers, using the frameworks and formulas I put together to solve problems. And it's all based around how do we create as many wins as possible for as many stakeholders? And how do we not exclude people from the mix? And all it takes is just better problem solving towards piecing together how you accumulate stakeholders, how you help solve their problems, and how do you utilize their assets to create movements of alignment where people feel that they are part of the solution and that they're being included. Because most business models these days they exclude. They're very potentially positive for a few, but they're negating or actually creating enemies, or creating people that are not happy with the models. And I think tech can be a good example of a lot of the business models we see in tech, and how people feel that maybe shareholders are being served, but at the expense and extraction of individuals. And if you bring in the technologies that we work in, all guys, it's all about empowering people with the tools they need to be in control of their lives. Their money, communication, and identity is the three pillars that I've always built on. So how do we create change and do things in a way that you can realize a deficiency in a sector? You can put the pieces together to align all the players, and I'm talking about everybody. It's not, you can't exclude potential incumbents, because then the incumbents are going to be fighting, and you got to figure out solutions that you utilize the strengths of stakeholders, and you provide them with a plan, which is what governments want too, is they want plans to fall on their lap that are going to help them solve their problems. So how do you provide frameworks to build problem solvers? How do you build virtuous leaders, right, into the mix? And from that, I think then you can then spread out and take those people to tackle the bigger problems that exist in the world. So that's, I think, how it gets done. And that's what I'm planning to spearhead. And I want to do it in Canada, and I want to showcase things can be done in Canada.
I think that you're absolutely right, that there is a need for a multi-stakeholder approach to solving big global problems. And I think that would also include developing an innovation economy in Canada, especially around this technology, right? Like we're talking about a technology that isn't just some other technology. This is the new era of the internet. It's an internet of value. It's the internet of ownership. Like Web3 is going to be the foundation for potentially decades of prosperity, economic growth, but also, disruption. And it's going to take, not only entrepreneurs and developers, but established companies, civil society, governments, et cetera, to make that happen. Having said all that, Ethereum is the most successful thing that Canada's ever done in the private sector. I won't call it a company, but it's like a commercial enterprise. And in essence, like it is an undertaking that created lots of wealth, and it's not government based. So, and the proof is in the pudding, right? This is a network that today is worth, depending on the day, but like $200 billion. It's 4 times as big as Shopify. It's twice the size of RBC. And most Canadians don't know it. Don't really know what it is. Maybe they've heard the name, but they don't really know what it is. The merge, to me, was the biggest business news story in Canada this month, maybe this year. And if you go to the ROB, it's the number 30 story after, some potash thing and some gold thing or whatever. So this country is completely out of touch with what's actually driving real value in the economy and what actually comes from Canada and what really matters. So I think that's kind of an issue. The media needs to get its act straight, but also government has a real role here. Like you said that the Ethereum Foundation had to make hard choices in its early days to move somewhere else where you had clarity about where you could build. And that's because probably Canada lacked clarity and maybe there were some risks there. And we're in a world where, like, Canada as a country doesn't have anything special going for it. Obviously it has a great university system and an educated population, and we have wealth, and it's a big market, and there's lots of innovative people here. But there's no reason why Web3 should be built in Canada any more than it should be built in Singapore or Germany or anywhere else. We're not the United States. We don't have that sort of critical mass. And so I think governments need to start acting more like, treating citizens not like customers, but treating business and innovators as something they want to attract to the country, ways to clarify the rules. So I'm with you on this multi-stakeholder approach, but I think isn't the solution, or one big solution, to just clarify the rules of the road so that people don't have to worry about building in this country without, fearing or worrying that they're somehow contravening, ancient rules around financial services. To me, it strikes me as like a big thing. And, we need to do it because, founders and entrepreneurs are looking at the world and saying, which of these places they're acting like customers, like which of these places offers me the best, conditions to be successful. And I'm not sure that we're doing a good job on that.
Yeah, I think that education plays a big role. I think a lot of governments, regulatory bodies just don't understand what's going on. It is very confusing stuff, and it is up to us as leaders to bring that forward and to actually provide plans of things that they can then utilize and do. A lot of it's based on fear in Canada. A lot of it's based on incumbents that many times are monopolies or oligopolies that are fearful of how things are going to impact them, and they're very strong lobby organizations. So that's kind of the battle that is going on. And I think it does start with education and how do you provide wins to more incumbents and getting them to understand that there's a global marketplace out there. And if you can get beyond the thinking that everything is in your borders, which is one of the other deficiencies a lot of times of Canadian organizations, is that there isn't that desire to really spread globally, and they're happy with kind of what they're doing here in Canada. So how do we change that mentality to a let's win here together, and then be able to take what we've learned to the rest of the world and be able to provide it to the rest of the world, and use that global marketplace as a way to say, let's team up and work together here, and let's come together and figure out how we utilize the strengths of stake of incumbents, and how do we provide them with new plans that are going to allow them to succeed and utilize what they're good at in the future. But I think it comes down to leadership. It comes down to people being able to present these ideas in ways that everybody's going to rally behind to create movements of alignment. And then you work towards that global plan, and not just a global plan of going and dominating, but a global plan of how do you share that with the rest of the world, yet keep your edge and advantage of along the way of being first movers and being people that are understanding early on where the future is going. And I think that's what a lot of the big stuff with us, with Ethereum and with the crypto space is we understood it 10 years ago, even more with some people, of where the future is heading. And when you can do that, you're able to piece together along with where you're seeing things heading. And I think it's that foresight that is really missing, and the starting of where will the world be in 10 years from now? And then and allowing governments and regulators to say that's happening. And you can continue to use the same means that you're doing in order to try to quell the fears of where it is you see. But if this is where it's heading, is there a different way of looking at it that can maybe still achieve your goals, yet not use the heavy-handed approaches or the approaches that are going to maybe not persuade people to come to Canada to set things up and to do things, or Canadians to go elsewhere to do that? So I really think that the biggest thing is leaders to come forward that's going to present a plan and an understanding and an education that this is a better way to do it. And you'll achieve your goals and jobs and productivity and all those things that governments want if you do it that way. Yeah. I just don't think they're the problem solving abilities generally in order to come up with those solutions themselves, and they'd rather have it handed to them. And I think, Alex, people like yourself and me and others could do this and get together and make this a reality. So maybe that's something that should be on our shoulders to be carrying out.
Yeah, I mean, we view ourselves as an important stakeholder in the crypto ecosystem. I don't know what kind of influence we can have on big government policy, but I think it's important if you care about this technology and what it enables. And I think you described those three things quite clearly: the idea of controlling your own identity, having control over your assets, and having some control over how you communicate and share your data. I think that those are kind of big, important issues, and I think they're probably going to be foundational to the next era of human progress, right? And I don't know. I think it's patriotic to try and do things here rather than to opting out. And Canada is an amazing place to live for all its problems, and it has, like all other places, many issues, historical problems that we're trying to reconcile, and existing problems around, I'd say, innovation and competitiveness. Still one of the best places in the world to live, to start a business, to raise a family. I think our values align with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think that we have a chance here. Now, I want to turn to an
and just let you know, Alex, I've actually got a little bit more time than I thought. So if you want to go 10 after 9, we can do that.
Well, careful what you wish for, because we're about to change the subject here.
Okay.
So despite all this stuff, the brass tacks is, in this country at least, crypto is becoming a partisan issue. The new leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, is someone who has a lot of fans, but is clearly very polarizing as a political figure. And I think Justin Trudeau is also very polarizing as a political figure. But Mr. Poilievre has come out on the side of cryptocurrencies. And I would say really just in a kind of narrow use case. He's talking about, how crypto can help people opt out from inflation that's caused by the government. And that might be true. But, telling people that they should sell all their dollars for Bitcoin, I don't think is responsible leadership, frankly. But we're missing the point here, which is now all of a sudden crypto is this thing that's used by radical right wingers, according to the liberals, and they're, shutting down bank accounts. Whereas on the right, it's a way to fight back against government overreach. Basically, the point is the narrative is all about politics now, which is a real shame, because the potential for blockchains like Ethereum and Web3 in general to, improve people's lives, to change the balance of power in business, to create maybe new companies and organizations that will create jobs and prosperity and broaden the tax base and do all the things that you want in an economy, are being shunted aside. And all we're doing is talking about the political part of this. Is that a problem for what you're trying to do, that this is the state of the discourse today?
I tend not to get lost in what's going on in politics. Pay my taxes. I find politics, unfortunately, to be very divisive, and that's unfortunately another example of the lack of being able to problem solve and figure out better ways than how to come together. And there's a lot of attack and a lot of negativity and all those things that I tend not to try to be part of. So I think politics, if you under a whole umbrella, yes, is an issue, the way that it works, and it seems to work like this in every country. The idea of, how do you create a divide? How do you take a very black and white stance and then how do you attack the other person because of their stance? And I think the key, if I was like to see change in that, would be a leader that could come out with more diplomacy, and a leader that would not be so, I think this is the way it is, and I'm going to go attack the other guy because he's saying it. It's just very toxic, and I try not to get involved or try to think of that. The goal to me has always been building. The goal to me is, how can I do what I want to do here? How do I do things that don't that don't lead to being regulated, in terms of business models that don't do things like become a custodian of people's money? How do we make sure the end user is in full control of their stuff, so that I'm not regulated as a custodian? I never ever wanted to run an exchange, and I don't, because again of the lack of or the having to deal with regulatory and compliance on that. Also the inability to scale globally with things that you do based on only being restricted in your country. So I've done my best over the initial years to help promote the adoption of these technologies, and did a lot of work with different government bodies and entities to educate, but then I kind of took a step back from that over the last number of years and just focused on the building and doing things that I didn't think I'd have to be intertwined much on the political side. And if you can think of new ways of doing things in business models, a lot of times you can do things that are going to allow you to flourish and thrive without the restrictions and handcuffs of certain regulatory constraints. So I've purposefully, just like social media and other things, I tend to stay away from what's going on there. And I have ideas on how it could be done better. And if someone was to come into a political party, how to create a situation maybe where there could be a lot more cooperation and collaboration together. But politics, unfortunately, are very, very divisive, like a lot of other things. And it's a mess. And I try to not get too engrossed in it, even though, maybe I need to do more as a leader to help to create the change that could be needed because leadership and problem solving, the two missing pieces. And what if that could be brought to the table, where we could have leaders of this country that are creating change in the way that they are approaching their campaigns and approaching their ideas, and trying to work together with others more, which would be a great change, I think.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think it's tough to know, just to sort of build on Alex's question a little bit, because it doesn't really make sense that it's becoming a partisan issue, because both sides should benefit, right? Like the right should embrace crypto because it promotes economic freedom, but the left should also sort of, in my opinion, embrace crypto because in a lot of ways it's disintermediates banks and things that people typically on the left villainize. So to me, it should be a nonpartisan issue. So I do share some of both of your
the easiest campaign approach is going to be, this guy's got that position, well, we're going to take this position and make that guy look like he's an idiot. And that seems to be a default approach, rather than thinking logically of, or imagine someone came up and said, you know what, I agree with my opponent here. could you people would just be blown away. But could that not be an approach of people saying, and rational people going, interesting, this guy has the opportunity to maybe he's doing things differently, and he's going to say, I agree with what they're saying, not even in this topic, but in other topics. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that Canadians are going to see both sides of a story here and be able to make the decisions that they want to make based on this, rather than just that campaign initiative is just attack, and no matter what they say, we're going to take the opposite opinion. That's, to me, is lazy. It's just not fruitful, and it just seems to be the way that things are always done, unfortunately.
I think I agree with, look, I mean, I think that if you want to change the world, Anthony, you're going to have to get your hands dirty, and politics is going to be a part of it. But I also agree with you that, like, there's more common ground here than I think people realize. And if you do want to solve problems, you've got to reach consensus, and that means making compromise, and it means finding areas where you've got shared values. And I think actually that, whatever your politics, I think in this country at least, the political leadership wants to make Canada a better place and cares about Canadians. They just have different views on how to get that done. But when it comes to something like this, Web3, new technologies, and so forth, where in history has it been a bad idea to invest in technology infrastructure? The railway in this country helped to knit together a bunch of loosely affiliated, territories and provinces. Telecommunications network connected us. The internet has created untold growth and wealth in this country, and it's been a very positive force. Why should this be any different? It's just one of those things where let's stop bickering about the minutia, and come up with some solutions and some rules of the road so that innovators can feel comfortable doing stuff in this country. It's interesting that we're having this discussion because today the White House released an update from its whole of government approach executive order that Biden released, I think in February or March of this year. And look, you can nitpick through this thing and say there's lots of issues, but fundamentally, there's a lot to like in this, or at least there's what you see in it is the government taking a really thoughtful approach. It says the report calls on agencies to promote innovation by kickstarting private sector R&D and helping cutting-edge U.S. firms find footholds in global markets. At the same time, they call for measures to mitigate the downside risks, and they talk about ESG and criminality and the like, and whatever. Like that's something that is going to be included in any government release. But I don't see anybody in Canada saying, how are we going to facilitate private sector R&D and help Canadian companies be more competitive globally? How are we going to make it easier for people to become knowledgeable and use this technology? They're talking about the Science Foundation in the US setting up a research lab for like advanced cryptography and setting standards, which by the way, the US government in the early days of the net was really instrumental in helping the industry become commercialized through the Telecommunications Act and through a number of other things. So it's just to me like, what are we doing here in this country? We're too busy navel gazing and picking petty political fights to look at the big picture here, and we're going to miss the opportunity of a decade, if not a century, to make Canada a leader in this next era of the internet, the next era of technology. And it's a real shame. So we're glad to see you stepping up, and others too, to try and make it happen here in Canada. So thanks, appreciate it.
To you too.
Yeah. Well, that's a great chat, Anthony. Thanks for joining us. We started with a quick merge talk, and then we quickly got into how to solve the world's problems, but starting maybe here at home. Canada as a country, it's big enough to make a difference, but small enough that you can actually say you want to change it and people take you seriously. So thank you for joining us. Thanks for everything you do, and hope to have you back on the show sometime soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. Take care.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.